Throughout history, freethinkers have outraged the religious with their wacky ideas about the virtues of free speech, reason, and of course, eating babies. Now, God is dying, and it's time to dispose of his remains. From the pits of hell, Satan sends two puppets of the imperialist West and the Zionist Jews against God, Islam, and tiny kittens to bring you their propaganda and conspire for a new world order. This is Secular Jihadists for a Muslim Enlightenment with Ali Rizwi and Armin Navabi.
Welcome everybody to another episode of Secular Jihadists for a Muslim Enlightenment. And now we are back here. We're back to this thing that happens every 5 or 6 years. We've got violence in the Middle East, specifically in Israel and Palestine. So this is what's happening. Israel, there's a new conflict, new stimulus, an event happened. There was a reaction to it. There's a reaction to the reaction. There's a reaction to the reaction. And of course, the initial event was a reaction to a whole bunch of other things that happened before that. So you're going to hear a lot of things here. It's going to probably trigger everybody. Everyone's going to have some issues with everything that we say. That's just the nature of this whole topic. But what we have to understand, and this is the really, really unfortunate part, is this conflict has been going on for over 70 years. Whatever we talk about today, eventually will get resolved temporarily. And then 5 or 6 years later, it's going to start again. And it's going to continue. And I don't think there's really going to be an end to it until there's a natural, inevitability towards, there was going to be a two-state solution potentially. I think the time's run out for that. So ultimately, I don't know what it's going to look like at the end. We'll talk about it. But Armin.
I don't even know how I'm going to fit all my thoughts into the next hour. We might have to go a bit over time.
Yeah. I've got a hard stop at midnight though. That's the only issue. But
okay,
we'll try.
I do have to first acknowledge the fact that we have Patreon questions that we will get to. We are doing something new where we because a lot of people say that they can't show up. A lot of patrons are not able to come live and ask their questions live. So we did a new thing on Patreon. We post these ahead of time and we let people ask their questions ahead of time. And I'm so glad to see that actually we do have 3 questions already ahead of time. So you, as a patron, you don't have to show up live to be able to ask your questions. You could post your questions ahead of time, and we will answer it during these live streams, right? So this is a new thing we're doing for patrons.
Okay.
But you could also ask them live, by the way. I already see people in the live chat. Guys, if you're in the live chat, please also post your questions. Anyways, I don't know how to start about this. I do have to say that we have some of our biases. But we're going to try. I'm going to try to represent. I've been listening and following so many people on this, and I'm going to try to represent what's every side is saying as much as steelman them as much as possible. Okay.
Right.
So right. I don't know. We could either go specifically look at what's happening in the past few days, and first address that. Ali, I'm hearing echo. If you could reduce my audio, that would be great. Mm-hmm. Or we could, and then we could go look at bigger picture and see what's the whole issue is, where we're heading, bigger picture, and what the problem is, and basically solve the problem for them in the Middle East, and then move on to bigger problems.
Yeah.
But so certain things happened that doesn't seem. I might say some things that is going to seem conspiratorial, all right? But I'm just going to put it out there, and maybe it's completely wrong, but the results speak for themselves. Whether or not it was planned or not, the results are happening in favor of the people who, if they had planned it, it's working out exactly perfectly for them, okay? So I don't know how we're gonna. Ali, what you want to get started about your views on how it got started, and I will poke holes at it.
Yeah, so let's start this because I don't think we can take the entire thing from the beginning, but let's just talk about the factual timeline of what happened.
Mhm.
All right. So there have been rising tensions in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. There's been a court case happening about the East Jerusalem, the people who've been living there for decades. And there is a decision by the Supreme Court of Israel. I don't know if it came out or whether it's planned or it's expected, where the Palestinian residents in Sheikh Jarrah, which is, it's in the East Jerusalem neighborhood, have to be evicted. So settlers are going to come in. They can essentially take the people and ask them to move out of their homes, and many of them have been living there for decades, and et cetera, et cetera. This has been happening for a very long time. There's settlement expansion, and East Jerusalem settlers are going to come in, and everybody's seen videos and things like that online. You see these people who are having to leave their homes, and settlers coming in, and so on. So that happened, and then there were protests. There was a storming of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is, the Temple Mount compound. Same thing. It's very, very sacred to both Muslims and Jewish people, religious Jews. And then, just went from there. Hamas got involved. They started firing rockets into Israel. Israel's Iron Dome intercepted them. Israel went in, did airstrikes, etc. And this is pretty much what happens every 4 or 5 years. So that's what it is. Now, if you want to go back and talk about what the original cause was, you're going to go back all the way to I don't know when, and you can have that conversation.
So Sheikh Jarrah is a neighborhood in East Jerusalem that is, you could, again, I know as soon as we say legally it was owned by by Jewish people, people are going to be like, well, those are Jewish. Those laws are written by Israel, but then we could go to international laws, and then that would become a huge discussion. But
whether or not the international law says the opposite.
I don't.
Let's just.
That's debatable, Ali. But can I finish?
Yeah.
What I'm saying.
Yeah.
Okay. But the thing is that what technically it's true that those lands were owned by Jewish people, but there are certain things that if you pay attention to, it seems like the timing of everything that happened and the way that it happened was intentional for causing conflict. Okay, so even the Sheikh Jarrah, those lands, those houses, does legally belong to some Jewish people, but there was a way for those Jewish owners to maintain ownership over those houses. And Palestinians to remain there as tenants for those people, and that was actually recommended by the court. However, this was intentionally rejected by by some Jewish people, and if you actually look at what was happening at the same time, was one of Netanyahu's close political allies opened an office like in the Jerusalem area as a symbolic way to basically poke with the intention of poking, okay, and to get a reaction. Here's the thing: the reaction has been by certain Arabs groups and some certain Arab leaders is not defendable, right? But at the same time, the Jewish far right groups seem to be fishing for that reaction, right? I'm not trying to both-side it here, okay? But I'm just telling you what's happening, okay? I'm just telling you what's happening. I'm not trying to say they're morally equivalent. I'm not doing anything at that. I'm not even analyzing who's morally worse, right? I'm just telling you what's happening, okay? It does seem like Netanyahu is doing exactly what he does every time he's in trouble. He causes tensions every time he's in trouble, okay? During the month of Ramadan, they put the barriers. They did certain things around the Masjid al-Aqsa and around Dome of the Rocks, knowing that this is going to get rioters out, right? They did this whole situation in Sheikh Jarrah, knowing it's going to get a reaction, right? They also let a lot of these far right Jewish groups come to that area to instigate, to get a reaction, without the police stopping them. Knowing we have seen the Israeli police stopping other protests, other rioters, not protests, rioters, when they needed to. Like, they could have easily handled this, and they didn't. It does seem like they wanted some sort of conflict, okay? And whether this is true or not, maybe let's say this is not true. The results have been exactly every time this seems like Netanyahu's time is up. I don't know if this time is going to work or not, but the main political, like, we're now seem to be going for a fifth election in Israel, and Netanyahu seemed like, okay, this time you're done. Every time he pulls something out of the hat. The man is a magician. The man, Netanyahu, is a freaking genius. Okay, right now his major political rival that seemed to be uniting with his opposition that was going to unseat him from power. Now, after all of this conflict, they are not opposing him anymore, and it seems like he might get a shot at not being removed from his position, right? So if that works, that means all of this actually end up working like every other time that Netanyahu did something similar. Okay, so yeah, go on.
I want to point out, because when you're saying that this is, I completely agree. This is a Netanyahu election thing, and there's a lot of other things at play. And I'm going to quickly list. First of all, this was the night of Laylatul Qadr, right, which is a very holy night for Muslims. Right, when they stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It's also it's a Jewish holiday, right? A very revered Jewish holiday. They both coincided, so that's also something that they actually chose this time to go ahead and do this. It's really, really hard to think that this is just coincidence when both of these things can coincide. Right. Yeah, there are a lot of things happening with, the Israelis. They can't really stop having elections. They keep on having elections, and there's no real resolution to them. Meanwhile, on the Palestinian side, Hamas is trying to gain control and represent politically the whole Palestinian cause. On the other hand, Fatah is completely incompetent. There are a lot of things that are coming together where this really, really benefits Netanyahu. I completely agree with it. But go on.
No, so just to be clear, guys, I consider myself a Zionist, okay? I want Israel to prosper, and I want Israeli people to be safe and secure. I also want Palestinian people to prosper, and I want more safety, security for them, and I also want them to actually have rights. And I also want them to be not electing a government that doesn't have much say in their day-to-day. The government that has a more effect on Palestinians' lives is the one that is the Israeli government, not the Fatah, right? And they have no say in who is basically controlling their life. I want more rights for the Palestinians, and I want safety and security for Israeli citizens. And I consider myself a Zionist, and I want secularism to defend secularism in Israel. And all the things that I just said, as a Zionist, as somebody that wants the best for Israelis and Palestinians, I think Netanyahu is horrible for everything that I mentioned. I think Netanyahu is the enemy of the Israeli people. I think Netanyahu and the far-right parties in Israel are a disaster for the safety and security of Israelis, not only for safety and security of Israelis, but for the Zionist project as a whole. I think the greatest threat to Israel as we speak, and I know this is something that a lot of people will think like this is too much. I'm going to say it anyways. The greatest threat to Israel's survival of Israel as we speak is not the Islamic Republic of Iran. It's not Hamas. It's not Hezbollah. The greatest threat to Israel as we speak is Netanyahu and far-right politicians in Israel.
Yeah. I've actually said exactly that on this, and we've both said it, I think, in previous episodes of this show a long time ago, that that Netanyahu and the Likud government is a bigger threat to Israel as a state, and a bigger existential threat to Israel as a Jewish democratic state, as both a Jewish and a democratic state, than Iran is ever going to be. But listen, Armin, I want to ask you to clarify one thing. So Zionism, being a Zionist, has a lot of different definitions. Some people call it, they think it's just a state for Jews. It doesn't have to be in the Middle East. It can be anywhere. It can be in British Columbia. It can be in Uganda. The other people say that Zionism, like the Zionists, is just having a state for the Jews in that specific area, right? That's prescribed in the scriptures, right? Where it is right now. And then there is another aspect of Zionism where they say that all of Judea and Samaria should be part of Israel. So that view of Zionism supports the occupation and supports settlement expansion. Which one are you?
I am, as a Zionist, I'm a defender of Israel's existence and its rights to defend itself against all her enemies, including Netanyahu. And I think that Israel could be a symbol, not only needs to exist as a place for Jewish people around the world to be considered a safe place for them against discrimination that they face. They are one of the most attacked and discriminated against group of people around the world, and the fact that they have a place that they could go to for safety is extremely important to me. But I also want this land, that it has become a land for people who were attacked by almost every country on the planet, to become a symbol for freedom, for security, for other groups, and against all form of discrimination, against the Muslims in China or in India, or a country that takes the first step ahead of everybody else to basically recognize things like the Armenian genocide, basically not only become a symbol for safety and security for the oppressed in Israel, but also around the world, right? That's my version of Zionism, right?
Yeah.
But the main thing that makes me a Zionist is the fact that I defend Israel's existence and its right to protect itself.
Yeah.
And I think that the settlements in the West Bank it goes against that interest, and I think the creeping far right or ultra-Orthodox Judaism in Israeli politics, with the help of Netanyahu, goes against that interest. And I think people like Netanyahu, let me actually make this clear, because a lot of people are thinking when I say Netanyahu is a greater risk to Israel than Hamas, they mean oh really, Armin? You're comparing Netanyahu to a genocidal, to an extremist, radical genocidal group that wants to basically eradicate every single Jewish person in Israel. Yes, I am. Because Netanyahu doesn't care about the Israeli people. Netanyahu doesn't care about Palestinian people. Netanyahu doesn't care about anybody. Netanyahu only cares about Netanyahu. Okay? Everything he does, he basically swings from one group to another. Anything that is in his best interest, he will start a coalition with the devil, or worse, Yahweh, if he had to be able to stay in power, right?
Yeah.
But I have so many examples of this. I don't even know if I want to go. I mean, and this is not something new. From its inception, for right-leaning groups in Israel, they have even worked. Guys, the way you need to look at this is not Palestine versus Israel. It's not Palestine versus Israel. It's Hamas and Netanyahu and far right politicians in Israel. And Hezbollah. They're on the same freaking side. Okay, yeah. I mean, ideologically not they're on the same side, but practically it ends up that they're on the same side. Right. It's basically Netanyahu, Hamas, and Hezbollah versus the Palestinian people and the Israeli people. And I know the Palestinian people and the Israeli people themselves don't recognize this, but they are being used for the sake of other people's position, for the relevancy and the power of Hamas, Hezbollah, and Netanyahu. Okay, the Palestinians and the Jewish people, the Arab. No, let me actually clarify this. Okay, not the Israelis and Palestinians. The Jews and the Arabs between the Jordanian River and the Mediterranean Sea. There is enough land for both of them. They are all capable of living with each other in peace, and there is enough for everybody to go around. If they just the only thing that is making them not able to live with each other is the stories that they're being told about their past, about their ethnicity, and about their religion. if they are told, if the only reason why they're fighting is because they have believed these stories. If they believe in different stories, there's no lack of resources, and there's no lack of space for these people. It's only because there are other people that are using these people for their own interests. And if they could only see that, and they won't, though, because we have seen one thing that we have seen is that it's not just the stories that we have been told has sunk deep to the Jewish and the Arab minds, because we see that it's not just Netanyahu, it's not just Hamas throwing missiles in Tel Aviv. We just saw so many videos of civilians attacking civilians. This goes against so many years of goodwill that we have, that we managed. Like when I was in Tel Aviv, when I was in Jerusalem, I saw so many Arabs and Israel and Jewish people living side by side without even noticing who's an Arab and who's a Jew. Okay, I saw the sweet shop in Tel Aviv, which was owned by some Arabs, and the people that were standing in line to get some sweets, it went so long. It went all to the next street, and there were so many Jews were buying sweets from the Arabs because they did that. Nobody cared that these were Jewish people. I was in Jerusalem on Sabbath when everything was closed in Jerusalem. All the non-religious Jews, they got in their cars and they went to the next city that was an Arab city, because everything over there was open. So the Jewish people were taking advantage of this Arab city that was not closed on Sabbath, because they didn't care about the fact that these are Arab-owning restaurants. They only cared about food, and a lot of them admitted that Arabs make better hummus than Jews. Okay, so this is how they can live with it. They are capable. We have seen for so many years that they are capable of living next to each other without any fights. But then, after so many years of building that goodwill, we things like this, the videos that go viral, are the Jewish people that are civilian Jewish radicals that are attacking civilian Arabs in the streets, and the radical Arabs that are attacking Jewish people in the streets. And it's just and that's what's going to go viral. That's what's going to stay in our mind. That's what we're going to remember. And it just takes one event like this to basically undo years worth of building goodwill.
Mm-hmm.
But go on now.
Yeah, I want to say two things here, right? That's important. And this is, one thing Armin said, and again, we've said it here before. Israel really should exercise its right to defend itself against its existential enemies like Benjamin Netanyahu. Okay, and let me talk about the main reason why this is a fact. This is actually a fact, and it's just simple demographics. And this is a problem we've talked about here before. It's called the demographic time bomb in Israel-Palestine. That with the settlement expansion, everything's going on. It's kind of, and after one of the Patreon commenter, we're going to get to that question too. He said that Armin has said that a one-state solution is inevitable. At this point, it is, and it's something that Netanyahu wants. Here's what the problem is. Israel prides itself on being a Jewish state and a democratic state. Okay, 50% of the population, roughly, in Israel-Palestine is Arab. Okay, now if you have a one state, and it's democratic, where everybody has the right to vote, you're going to end up with the 51st Arab state of the world. Israel is not going to be a Jewish state anymore, because they're not going to elect. It's not going to be Jewish. It's 50% of the population is going to be Arab, and they're going to elect their own leaders. If you don't give the Arabs the right to vote, if you don't give a majority of the Arabs the right to vote, then you will stay a Jewish state. You're not going to be a democracy. Okay, so one state solution means that Israel is going to have to choose between being either a Jewish state or a democracy. This is a fact. It's a demographic fact. Sorry, and there's no way around it. This is inevitable. So that's one way. This is an existential threat to Israel as a Jewish democratic state. Now, that's one thing. And the second thing is there needs to be a distinction, as Armin was kind of talking about, between the Palestinian people and Hamas. Right? Hamas has an agenda, and I don't like it when people think of, okay, Palestinians are attacking, calling them terrorists. Okay, Hamas has a terrorist agenda. They do want to, even if you gave Israel, if Israel gave like if Palestine became a separate independent nation with its own army, and Hamas had any kind of influence over it, Hamas's agenda, even in a separate independent Palestinian state, that would find some grievance and some excuse to go and attack Israel and wipe it off the face of the earth. Okay, everybody who lives in that region and who's familiar with this knows this, especially the Arabs, right? And especially the Muslims. We all know this. Now, aside from Hamas, though, if you take that
I
away,
would be careful with what you're saying, because YouTube might actually strike.
okay.
The way, even if you say Hamas wants that, YouTube doesn't know that.
Okay, got it. But if you take away from Hamas and you look at just the regular Palestinian people, and this is something that Armin, I know that you've been there. I talk to people like this all the time. I know a lot of people that I've had conversations with about this who are in the region, right? There is I don't think that when you are under military occupation, when you're under military occupation by one of the most powerful armies in the world, and you don't have your own airspace, you don't have your own, your rights are limited, you don't have any say over the people who are ruling you, you don't have access to travel all over the place, you don't have an independent army, you don't have anything like that. When you're in a situation like that, right, and it's so uneven, both sides are so uneven, and you strike back, that's an insurgency. That's a place where you are. You're not going in. That's not terrorism. That's desperation. And you're trying to fight back somehow. You're holding these protests. People are, hold on, I'm talking about the Palestinians. That's a very different thing from what Hamas does, right? And this is why you're right. I mean, Hamas actually plays into, Hamas is damaging for Palestinians who are looking for independence. And Hamas is actually helping the Israelis who want to use this whole terrorism idea that all the Palestinians are terrorists. They want to use that idea to justify the military occupation indefinitely. Right? So those are the two things I think that are really at the crux of this. Like this, whatever it is, whenever you talk about which side did what, everything, you have to remember that there is a military occupation, there's settlement expansion that's going on that is purely rooted in religious fundamentalism. Purely, there's no other reason to expand settlement. There's no reason to go into the West Bank and build settlements, or to go, there's absolutely no reason to do that is rational or secular or legal, right? If you look at the US administrations, going all the way to Lyndon Johnson, Republican, Democratic, everyone has opposed the settlements, with the exception of Trump. Every single
No, Trump also.
Trump also opposed it? Okay.
Yep.
All right. So, but everyone, this has been a consistent U.S. policy. They have opposed it. The UN has opposed it. This is the fact that has made Israel a pariah. This continuing all this settlement expansion because they need the votes of the settlers and the super religious, faith-head Jewish people who want to continue doing that, right? And this is not. So when you do that, you make the two-state solution impossible. And when you are inevitably heading towards a one-state solution, that is the death. It is the death of Israel as a Jewish democratic state, because it can't be both then. It just can't.
All right.
Yeah.
Can I? All right.
Yeah, go for
it. I just want to be clear about this, okay? Because a lot of people are not very right in the head, so they don't understand that when we criticize, because their minds are binary and they're thinking black and white terms, and for them, I know like most of you understand this, but for those idiots who might think that we might be making any excuses for Hamas or Hezbollah, okay? First of all, if you think that, you're a moron, okay? Second of all, do not let any, when we criticize Netanyahu for using organizations like Hamas for his own political agenda, that is in no shape or form any excuse or any justification for what Hamas does or what it stands for. Okay? You should be able to look at what Netanyahu is doing and look at what these far-right parties in Israel are taking Israel in the direction of, without somebody constantly throwing but Hamas in your face. Okay? Just, if anybody tries to do that to you, just tell them at the beginning, like, hey, Hamas, bad, right? Hezbollah bad, Hamas bad. We agree on that, okay? We agree they're evil organizations, they're genocidal, and there's nothing that they do or nothing that they stand for that both of us can defend. Agree? Okay, agree. Can we now look at what Netanyahu is doing with the help of these organizations? That's one thing, okay? However, I also have to mention that when you criticize the far-right groups and Netanyahu's administration, do not let anybody ever come and say, well, can you blame Hamas though? Can you blame these resistance groups? Like, you see, like, yes, I can blame them, right? Just because I am very much against the right-wing politicians in Israel and what they're doing to Israel, that doesn't mean that I will use that ever as a way to justify these groups and their human rights violations. Okay, if you want to be like, oh, he's against Netanyahu, so he's like justifying him, your mind is broken. Go fix it before, like, you can't use you're thinking binaries, so go fix that. Okay, that's one thing. I do want to touch on what Ali just said. If you want to think about this longer term, and this goes back to why we think Netanyahu is such a threat to Israel, all right? And anybody, like, even if he's gone, anybody that thinks like him, anybody that basically wants to constantly use the Islamic Republic of Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas as a way to remain in power, they are sacrificing Israelis. These are people who are sacrificing Israelis' future for their own careers, okay? So we're just mentioning Netanyahu because that's him right now. He just symbolizes that way of thinking right now, okay? Anybody else that comes and does the same thing, same goes to him, right? But there are three, just to clarify what the situation is, there's only three options, okay? Either a two-state solution, the status quo, or a one-state solution, okay? The two-state solution has been made close to impossible because of the settlements. I don't know if it's completely impossible. Somebody might be able to come and save it. I've been told somehow people like, oh, but if this happens and that happens and we pull out of here and then they're like, oh, we give these lands to that people, like, okay, but is that going to happen? They're like, no. Okay, so the two-state solution, that was basically the only chance to a peaceful resolution, has been made impossible because of the settlements. Thank you very much, Netanyahu. Okay, the status quo is not gonna last forever. I don't know when. You can't just have all these people between the whatever you want to call this land, between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. You have a whole bunch of people that are not being represented by any government that they have a decision in, right? These people are not represented. These people have no choice in anything that is happening in their lives. Some people call it apartheid. Some people are like, oh no, technically it's not apartheid because these are the definitions of apartheid. I don't know what you want to call it. These people have no say in who rules over their lives. They have no control. The government that they vote for is not the government that actually makes the decisions on what happens in their lives. This is not going to last forever. So the status quo at some point will end. What's remaining? The remaining option is a one-state solution. How is this one-state solution is going to come about? I don't know. It's probably not going to be by choice. It's probably going to be forced upon these lands. The way it's going to be forced upon these lands could look extremely ugly. It could be less ugly and it could be very ugly. I'm not even going to say what the version of extreme ugly is because I'm afraid about what YouTube is going to think I'm saying. But that's going to be the eventual outcome if things go the same way. And guess what? Between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, will be more Arabs than Jews. And I don't know and at some point, these people, I'm not going to mention the ugly way, but the less ugly way is that they're going to vote. Like, they're going to be in a situation where everyone votes is going to be equal. Not just the Arab Israelis. I'm talking about the Palestinians as well. They will have votes equal to the Jewish people that are living in Israel. I don't know what's going to be. I have no idea what's going to be the situation of Jewish people living under the land where every single Arab is in that situation is going to have the same equal votes to the Jews. I have no idea what lives are going to look like. I'm not talking about Jewish Arab Israelis. I'm also talking about every single person. Go look at the views that Arabs in Gaza Strip have about Jewish people. Okay, I'm not going to say their views because we're going to get a strike if I mention their views. But go look at their average views and then think about all their numbers and think about all those people in Gaza Strip one day having equal votes to Jewish people living in Israel. Okay, I fear for the Jews. I fear for the Jews. And guess who is making this inevitable? This situation inevitable? Netanyahu, because of the settlements. This is what's happening. This is why I fear for Israeli Jews. This is why I think like the greatest threat to them is somebody like Netanyahu, because of the settlements. Because the settlements has made the two-state solution, which was the only way out, impossible. Okay.
We are so. I'm going to mention. I'm going to plug something right now. 7 years ago, I wrote an article called. Was it something about? I can't even remember the title of it. It's like 7 reasons you shouldn't choose sides in the Middle East conflict or something like that. And it was actually one of the most widely read articles in HuffPost history. And I think it's still relevant today. There's a few things in it that I would probably modify and update, but I'll put a link to it in the description for this so you guys can read it as well. But Armin, like this is something that we almost pretty much 100% align on. Like I don't even have anything to say in response to it, but I'm thinking, we have like
we have a lot of questions. Yeah, I just have one more thing to touch on, which I'm not sure what your views is going to be.
No, let's do it. Go for it.
And then after that, we're going to go to Patreon questions. Okay.
Yeah.
Patreon questions. So here's the thing. Ali, what do you think about? How do you respond to the fact that, so we looked at everything big picture. What do you say about the missiles that right now is being thrown into Gaza Strip in response to Hamas's missiles being thrown into Israel?
What do I think of? What aspect are you talking about?
Because people are like saying that you're killing children in Gaza Strip. Like, I don't even know, the numbers keep changing, but last time I heard there was like at least 30 children, I think, who were dead.
Yeah,
in
this
Gaza
is something. Look, man, you need to avoid killing kids no matter what. You have to avoid them, but there is a problem. There's a problem, and I wrote about this in the article. This was a problem. It's always been, and this goes to the heart of what you're saying about Hamas is the enemy of the Palestinians, just like Netanyahu is the enemy of the Israelis, right? They do that. There are videos that have come out with Hamas people telling Palestinians, people in Gaza, to bring their children out on rooftops. Bring out your children, because when the Israelis see that they're children, then they won't bomb them. They know. So that means two things. First of all, they know that Israel is not going to deliberately target children. In fact, they will often try to avoid legitimate targets because they see children, they don't want to kill the children because it doesn't help them. I mean, just going around all these pictures and videos that circulate of children dying, there's no way that has made Israel a pariah. Like, Israel has become a pariah in the world, including the Western world, right, because of all of these images that have come out. So it does not help them, does not help their cause. So I don't think it's deliberate. I think they try to avoid it. Hamas knows that's why they ask Gazans to come out. This is on videos. You can watch them online, asking people to bring their kids out so that the Israelis don't bomb. That's number one. Right? So this is a problem. The second thing is that when you do have to strike back, I mean, someone's firing rockets at you, especially when it's Hamas, you have to fire back. Like, I mean, you have to do something. That if you're not going to shoot missiles into it, you got to do something. But you have to avoid killing the kids. And it's just. I don't know. I don't actually have a fully formed opinion on this. I really don't. I wish that I would think in my mind, and I don't know that much about this. I don't know what the options are. I would think in my mind that if you are the most powerful and sophisticated military in the world, if you can take out an Iranian nuclear physicist, with artificial intelligence, if you have all of that technology, why can't you avoid killing children?
Right. Okay, so actually, I have had a similar conversation. I forgot the quote by this Israeli chief of staff that said something similar regarding the operations that needs to happen. It needs to be a lot more targeted. However, okay, here's the thing. There's two ways to look at this, right? So we know Hamas uses civilians as shields. We know that, okay? We also know that just because your enemy uses civilians as shield, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to avoid targeting that shield, right? We also know that Hamas doesn't care about hitting civilians. In fact, they actively target civilians on purpose. And Israel's army does actually try to avoid civilians. However, that doesn't mean that they are not to be blamed, okay? The thing is that the argument is that if any other nation, if they had missiles coming down upon them by their neighbors, they would have responded similarly in throwing rockets back, if not even more aggressively. Okay. And they also show that Israel does try to avoid citizens, but there's only so much you can do. So there's two issues with this argument. Okay. The fact that Hamas is terrible, again, shouldn't be used as a way for us to not be able to criticize Israel's performance, okay? Everybody looks good if you compare them to Hamas, okay? Anyone's human rights record looks amazing if you compare them to Hamas. That should not be the benchmark, okay? However, Israel could do better in two ways. First of all, the fact is that even if Israel's hands are tied, that you look, they're throwing missiles. The places in Israel where the Hamas operate agents are, there are places where if we hit, civilians will die, but that doesn't mean we should not be hitting them. But who put Israel in this position that they're now forced to throw back missiles into Gaza? So if you zoom in at what's happening right now, you might find an argument that we don't have a choice, right? People are like, well, look, Israel has a lot more military might and Hamas doesn't, and this is the fair fight. That's such a stupid criticism of Israel. If your civilians are being attacked, you don't try to tie your own hand. We're like, oh, let's only use enough military, that the same military power that our enemy has. No, you use all your military power. You don't it's not supposed to be a fair fight. If you are more powerful, you use all your power. The fact that your enemy has less power doesn't mean that you're going to withhold what you can do in your response. That's such a dumb criticism of Israel. Okay, that doesn't make any sense. Okay, use everything you can against your enemies, obviously. However, who put Israel in the situation where they now have to throw missiles into Gaza? Israel's government put them into the situation. As we discussed, both in short term and in long term, these conflicts are made by design for a purpose. So again, if you zoom in short term and you look at, Hamas is throwing missiles into civilian areas, the idea of the Israeli military has to respond in some way. Yes, you might have an argument. But once you zoom out and you see that this position was made by design, then every single civilian that is dying in Gaza, their blood is on Netanyahu's hand. And that's it, if you think about it that way, right? So that's one point. Another point is that if you talk about not only Palestinian civilians that are dying, their blood is on Netanyahu's hands, on Netanyahu's hands and Hamas's hands. The civilians that are dying in Israel, Israeli civilians that are dying, their blood is also in Netanyahu's hands. Okay. The issue with Fakhrizadeh, people say, like, look, here's the thing. When Mossad took out Fakhrizadeh, okay, his wife was centimeters away from him. How much collateral damage do we have when Fakhrizadeh was taken out by Israel? Zero collateral damage. Okay, not even his wife was not even bruised, let alone die. Okay. However, the point to this is, like, somebody might say, like, Armin, Fakhrizadeh's assassination was planned years ahead of time, and this was a major operation. You can't do that with every single Hamas leader inside Gaza, right? And you need a fast response, right? But do you really need a fast response? You don't need to wait for Hamas to attack to be able to take down their leaders the way their Fakhrizadeh was taken out. I'm telling you that it is within Israel's resources and capabilities for them to completely annihilate Hamas by taking out their leadership one by one if they wanted to. If they can take Fakhrizadeh in Iran with all the protection that he had, with all the security, with how big of an asset was Fakhrizadeh to Iran? They are capable. They don't even have to wait for a Hamas attack. They could go into time of peace. Hamas is an organization that you don't need excuses for them to take out their leaders. You could go in and eliminate their leaders with no excuses needed. Okay, and you could plan years for that. You could do that, but not only Netanyahu came into power promising that he's going to completely annihilate Hamas. Not only he did not do that, he actually let them get support. He let them get funding. He let them get resources from Qatar. He opened the doors for them to get funding. The Hamas organization is an organization based on another Islamic radical group that was actively funded by Israel. I don't know if you knew this, Ali, as a way to fight the PLO. These are Israel's, like, Hamas and Israel's current government are allies, and they need each other. Okay, it's the same thing. They need each other for their relevancy and for their existence. Okay, and this happens everywhere. Okay, the same way Modi uses Pakistan as soon as the elections are coming, and he seems like his power is in jeopardy. He uses Pakistan as a way, identity politics, fear-mongering, tribalism, poking the bear so that I could get a reaction. All of a sudden, his popularity rate goes through the roof. People say this is a conspiracy, but this is a conspiracy that has constantly worked over and over and over and over again by so many right-leaning politicians. And it's continued to work. It works for Netanyahu and it works for Hamas. Do you think Hamas wants Israel to not exist? No, Hamas, again, what you hear and what these people want are different. Hamas loves Netanyahu. Hamas wants Netanyahu to be. Hamas wants Palestinians' lives to be miserable because it invests in their misery. The Islamic Republic of Iran invest, and Hezbollah, they invest in the misery and victimization and oppression of the Palestinian people. And Netanyahu invests and banks on this fear and on the security risk to the Israeli people. This is so obvious. This is so clear that if you don't see this, you are blind. Anyways,
sorry, I'm muted. Yeah, so let's just go to, we have 12, and I'm sorry, I have another call right at the time we finish.
Right, so here's the first question. Here, I put the first question here, and I'm going to highlight it. Wait.
Great. So this is from Metroid Socrates. These are really good questions, by the way, from the patrons. So let's just do this really quickly.
Just to clarify, these are questions that were asked ahead of time before we went live. So that's, and again, we are letting our patrons to send their questions to us ahead of time, so we could answer them even if they're not here live with us on air. Go on.
Right. So Metroid Socrates is saying, do you think Israel should try to negotiate some kind of truce with Hamas? There have been multiple occasions where Hamas leaders have said they'd be willing to agree to a long-term hudna. Okay, so a few years ago, they only asked that Israel relax the siege of Gaza in return. Right. So a few years ago, they did this. You got to understand one thing about Gaza, that since for many years now, Gaza is not under occupation. There's no occupying. There were settlers that were actually removed. They were in Gaza before. They were forcibly removed by Israel many years ago. So it's not really technically like they have relaxed the siege on Gaza, and it was kind of a test. And this happened some time ago, and it didn't really help much, as it's obvious. So Hamas, if they did ask for this to just relax the siege on Gaza, they do that. It doesn't really help. You got to understand, with Hamas, there's no end to it. It's that they're not like the regular Palestinians, right? It's like when Antifa people get in and try to defend people who are fighting against police brutality, black people fighting against. There's a huge disconnect between the two, and a lot of Palestinians don't like Hamas. They don't like.
Okay, but they're elected by the Palestinians. Here's the thing. I know.
Let's talk about that. That's a loaded thing. Like when you say they're elected by the Palestinians, like they're elected by Gazans, and they're elected by Gazans for a lot of other reasons. Like Fatah, the other party is completely, when it comes to social services and providing things like that, they're completely useless. Hamas is very good at providing those things. But anyway, that's a longer conversation.
Yeah. Okay.
Say what you're gonna say.
Yeah. So Hamas is elected by the Palestinian people, and I just want to make it clear that Palestinian people making bad decisions, or Israeli people making bad decisions and voting for Netanyahu is not in any way should be used as an excuse to deny their right to security and safety and prosperity. Okay. Yeah. Metroid is clarifying his question, saying, I'm referring to all the restrictions and things that can be important to get Gaza for Israel. They were elected. Yeah, okay, so here's the thing. What Hamas says and what Hamas wants is two different things. What Hamas says to the international community and what Hamas actually says for its own internal consumption by Palestinians are completely contradictory. Hamas never wants anything. Like Hamas is a pro-genocidal. Like there is no way that Hamas will ever negotiation with Hamas does not make any sense. Okay, the only as bad as Fatah is, again, here's the thing. If I say Fatah is better than Hamas, that's not a defense of Fatah. Fatah is horrible as well. But if you know anything about the politics, Fatah is the only organization that you could have negotiations with. Hamas is a terrorist group that should not be negotiated with. What they say should not ever be believed. And removing any of the restrictions, Hamas might keep using starving Palestinians in the Gaza Strip as a way to signal to the international community that the restrictions need to be lifted. But we know and they know that restrictions being lifted is mainly they don't care about the Palestinians. They want to get missiles inside the Gaza Strip. That's what they want. And Israel knows that, and that's why they would not negotiate with them when it comes to removing any of the restrictions. Okay, and in fact, the main reason why Hamas is in the best interest of Netanyahu is because if Hamas wasn't a thing, then Israel would be more likely to be forced to actually negotiate with Fatah, right? So the whole idea of having Hamas there and having, Netanyahu wants the Palestinian people to elect Hamas because that will give them an excuse for actually not negotiating and not ever having a peace deal. Hamas is such a convenient enemy for Netanyahu that why would they negotiate with them where not having a peace with the Palestinians is working? So why would he? Let me actually be very clear with everybody, okay? A lot of people thinking like, but hey, if we just do this, we get peace. And if we do this, we get peace. Why are they not doing these things? We all know that if they do this and this and this, and that side do this and this and this, we're going to get peace. So why wouldn't they do it? Have you considered, here's the thing, a lot of people think that these people must be idiots. We all can see how we get peace. These people are morons. They're not morons. Maybe if you shift the way you're looking at things, maybe if you see that maybe they don't want peace, maybe everything will start making sense to everybody if you stop assuming that they're morons, but just start assuming that maybe peace is not actually a goal here. And then most of their actions start making sense to everybody, right? So
yeah, that's exactly it. Okay, so yeah, let's get the second pre-patient question. And this is, I'll start reading it out now. Where is it? Yeah. The private chat. Okay. Rachel Davies is asking, do you think the value placed on martyrdom in Islam should be considered when evaluating the differences in body count between sides? Does this belief contribute to a kind of recklessness with civilian and child lives by Palestinian leadership? Yeah. So that's two different questions. I don't think that the martyrdom thing in Islam should be considered because we're smarter than that. Yeah, the Quran does say that those people who die in the way of God are not really dead. So, by that count, a lot of these casualty counts will drop dramatically. But that's not what it is. This is what we were talking about earlier. I mean, you don't have all of these people are not terrorists, right? Some of them are insurgents and they are being militarily occupied. Like, they don't have freedom. They're locked in a place that's like the size of Manhattan and they're super crowded and they don't have anything. Like, they're really, really struggling, and they've been living like this for decades and decades. So it's a very, and by the way, I should also say Egypt controls the southern border of it. So it's not like Egypt is helping them or the other Arab states are helping them either. So they are, it's not just Israel. I mean, they're completely being targeted by everybody. They're locked into this kind of cage, and they don't have any independence. So I think that's very different than, for example, when you have terrorists in Saudi Arabia coming to the US and attacking the Twin Towers. I mean, it's a totally different thing. So I'm not a fan of using that term blanketly upon everybody. With Hamas, yes, I think it applies. Now, does it apply to a kind of recklessness with civilian and child lives? This is a problem. If you believe in martyrdom, if you believe in life after death, if you believe that, okay, death is this amazing thing. If you die for God, then, you go to heaven. And if you believe in that kind of thing, then yes, you do devalue life. The very concept of martyrdom and dying for a good cause, right, that's divine, and life continuing afterwards is an insult to life on earth. It's a devaluation of life on earth. So that question you're right about. That's my view on it. I don't know, Armin, if you agree, then we can move on to the next one.
No, the main reason why there's differences in body count is because Israel has much a stronger military power than Hamas does. That's the main reason. But however, I do have to say that religion is okay. So again, this is not a binary thing. People are like, oh, is it religion or is it not religion that has an influence on the activities on the Palestinian side? It is religion, and there's many other things as well. The people who want to deny the role of religion completely, they are idiots. And the people who want to say that this is just because of religion and religion is so they're also idiots. Okay, obviously religion has a role, but obviously there are many other factors. The level of desperation, the condition that these people are living in, this is just the poverty, the lack of job, the lack of hope for anything coming in future. All of this is like major fuel for radicalization, and having a religious ideology that supports that, it's a perfect way for you to use it. So it's like, yeah, the religious radicalization helps, but you also need the base to work on, because if it was just because of religion, then we would see these activities by Muslims in Tunisia, which we don't, right? So it is not just like it's not just one factor, but religion has an influence, but the difference in body counts is mostly because of the difference in the military power that each side has. Anyways, here's the last question. Here's another
patient question. Okay, Armin has said that he thinks a one-state solution is inevitable. Do you think there's still at all a chance that a state could be secular and democratic with equal rights for both Jews and Palestinians? So we've already covered this.
Yeah, we did cover this
in the podcast. Can I say one thing about this?
Go ahead.
Imagine, and I read this. I don't know whose idea this was. Imagine if every week after like Friday prayers, I think it was Thomas Friedman who said it, all of the Palestinians just came out with signs that said we want voting rights. completely peaceful, no nothing, no issue. They just said, give us the right to vote. And images of that, those are the images that went viral around the world. Okay, all of them just came out and said that. There's no violence, there's no rockets, just voting rights protests coming out, like, and that's it. That's all that happened. I think that would be so much more powerful. I mean, that's the kind of thing that I think would put a lot of pressure on Israel. But that's not something that's going to happen. I don't know how much hope there is for this region. I don't think there's a whole lot.
Yeah, it doesn't seem there's much hope. There seems like the conflict is going to continue and might get a lot worse. Again, doesn't look very good, but I am really hoping that. Well, I don't think there's much of a chance, but the only way out of this is to stop the settlement, and that has seemed to become impossible. The one-state solution, once we get there, after maybe a very ugly phase, maybe we're going to get to a situation. We'll probably at that point we'll get to a situation where things are better. Like we probably live in a completely different world by then. If like Jews and Arabs live side by side without caring about each other's religion or ethnicity. But before we get there, it's going to be ugly. And it's not even safe for me to describe how ugly that could look, right? So forget, like you say, would it be a secular democratic? Like the concerns that I have is way beyond whether it's going to be like, not only it will not be like, we might not have secular democracy. If we don't have secular democracy, but avoid that image that I'm seeing in my head, I see that as a win. Like secular democracy at that point, if we reach there, would be such a ideal, like so much above what I'm hoping for, that seems like a dream. Like I'm just hoping for a lot of bloodshed, or like
let's just clip that part. I'm just hoping for a lot of bloodshed. Armin and Ali.
I'm hoping for not like between a lot of bloodshed and some bloodshed. I'm just hoping for some bloodshed. You know what I mean? Like it looks like I'm just hoping like there's not going to be rivers of blood. Okay. So you guys are talking about like, oh, well, we have secular democracy. Like, can we like focus on avoiding full-on outright confrontational war at some point? Again, guys, this is like you're sitting on a box of explosive in the region. You have a whole bunch of Arabs who do not have the rights to live based on their own decisions and their choice with freedom and full rights. And this will one day open. Like this, the gates to this hell that has been created will one day open, right? So you have heaven at one side, and the hell that you created right next to this heaven is becoming overcrowded, and the walls will one day crack. And I'm imagining once this wall cracks and it flows into this heaven, what that is going to look like. Can we avoid a full-on confrontation of war? I'm not even thinking like, oh, can we have secular democracy? Like, no, we're not even. Can we just avoid not like a full-on bloodshed? Like that's what I'm thinking. Like, so that's what I'm. Yeah. That's what I'm trying to avoid. I'm thinking of that people need to avoid. The only way you could avoid that, by the way, is to unite people, Palestinians and Israel. You know, the cheesy kumbaya, hey, we're Arabs and Jews, we could live with each other, and screw the politicians. You know those cringy things that make your skin crawl and want to puke? Unfortunately, that's what we need right now, okay? We need cringy kumbaya, puke-worthy videos of people like, oh, peace, we could like screw the politicians, all those things that I hate to even watch because it's just the cringe is not worth, like, I hope other people watch it. I don't want to see it. That's what we need right now, okay?
It's like the Islamic unicorn that we talked about. Funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, on Eid, the Eid unicorn. Okay, so let's just do. I can do. Let's do 5 more minutes, and let's do 1 or 2 more questions, if that's okay.
All right. You could tell me which questions to highlight in the live chat.
Yeah. So I mean, there's some comments. So there's one question here from Alex of Oz, the panel logician, at 11:39 p.m. For me, it's 11:39. Yeah, he's saying. So I think this is because this is something we haven't covered. Sorry, guys. A lot of the questions you have here we have sort of covered. So, but this is. He's like, which is worse, allowing 100 kids to be killed or preventing 100 kids from being killed, but in the process killing 50 different kids? This is a question that comes up a lot, and it's that whole idea of, look, the hardest decisions in life, yes, are the ones between bad and worse. When they're not between good and bad. You have to choose between bad and worse. And if you choose the bad, then a lot of people will be totally oblivious that there was a worse alternatives, and you're gonna get crap either way. This, I don't think, is one of those things. I think we talked about this, being able to avoid killing, child casualties.
So yeah, I think this situation, if you look at it just about what's happening in the past few days, it seems like it's an obvious utilitarian calculation about the number of civilians death, right? But again, I need people to be able to zoom out and look at the bigger picture and see that Israel didn't need to be in this position that they have to choose between 50 kids or 100 kids. Okay? This has been forced upon. This has been a coalition of Hamas and Netanyahu forcing this upon the Palestinian and Israeli people. And the problem is that Israelis and Palestinians have been fooled to choose this for themselves. Netanyahu was voted by the Israelis. Hamas was voted by Palestinians, right? So the solution to this is to try to get Palestinians, again, this is a solution that is impossible, but it seems, and Israelis to realize their enemies is within. The call is coming from inside the home, okay? That's what the story needs to be told. That's the story that needs to be told. Here, we have at the bottom, we have a question here.
Okay. So what kinds of effects do you think the pressure placed by the international community can have on the situation, especially as Israel increasingly becomes a pariah in the West? Yeah, so this is a great question.
That's a whole stream. That's a whole stream right there.
Yeah, there's a whole stream on it. And maybe we should do this stream because, I was thinking about this, and I want to talk, Michelle, like earlier I said that, the Thomas Friedman's idea that if once a week after Friday prayers, all Palestinians, Gaza, West Bank, whoever wants independence, which all of them do, just come out with these mass peaceful marches, like the Women's March, like all these things, just saying, give us the right to vote. We want democracy. Give us the right to vote. And that's, if you're talking about the international community and the pressure on the international community, that is a thing that's going to go viral, especially in the social media age. Israel is going to be it's going to be impossible for Israel to ignore. It's going to be impossible for Western countries to say, okay, we stand with what Israel's doing, what Netanyahu's doing. It's going to be impossible for them to make that case because it's going to come across and appear anti-democratic, which it is. Right?
Can I respond to this?
Yeah.
Also? All right. So I have to. Can you mute yourself? Oh yeah, there we go. Right now, we are saying for the first time, Democratic politicians in the United States discussing more than just Bernie Sanders, talking about making aid to Israel conditional. Okay, this is unimaginable to be spoken by so many politicians in the United States this openly. This used to be political suicide. Okay. Even suggesting this used to be political suicide. The views right now in the United States are shifting, and the fact that Democrats are now in power shows how bad of an investment what Netanyahu made to, first of all, when Obama was in power, to turn his back on Obama and go to the Republicans directly in Congress. And then when Trump was in power, making all of his investment with Trump, and Trump becoming so unpopular right after in the United States, and then with all the Black Lives Matter and all the fighting for the oppressed, all of that together made Netanyahu's investment in Republicans and Trump such a bad idea that now everything is now firing back on him. Everything is firing back on him, right? So this was a bet that Netanyahu made, and now you can see that he's the return. Again, and one thing else that is very interesting is that now the lobbyists, like Israeli lobbyists in the United States and all the advisors and all these think tanks and institutions are realizing that not only they can't rely on Americans, the public opinion in the United States is very quickly shifting against them, and not only the politicians now in power are also, I mean, even Biden is very traditional, so he will still is in his instinct to constantly say Israel has a right to defend itself, but the more and more Democrats are saying are talking differently. But they know that they can't rely on the Democrats, the Congress, and the American people. The interesting thing is that Israel now sees that they can't even rely on Jewish Americans. Jewish Americans' opinions is now more pro-Palestinian than Israel as well. It's very interesting because Israel is now realizing that they need evangelicals in the United States more than they need Jewish people in America, more than they need Jewish Americans are less reliable as a source of support for Israel in the future than evangelical Americans. Like the Christian Americans are now the main group that they need to appeal to as a source for political power.
I can, and again, this is the last question because I gotta go, but I have to reiterate this point. There's, in addition to those things that you said about Netanyahu coming and addressing the Republicans in Congress and everything, Biden himself as vice president went to visit Israel, and the same day, the Israelis started doing all this construction on new settlements and demolitions, and if I remember correctly, and he took that very, very badly. So there's bad blood between them on a very, very direct level. And here's the thing: when I grew up, Democrats and Republicans alike, the one thing that that had bipartisan, unwavering support on was alliance with Israel. Israel is our biggest ally. We have to support them no matter what. Democrats, Republicans, it used to frustrate Muslims everywhere. Netanyahu decided, his calculation was, you know what, instead of having both parties, let's just put it down to one. Let's just make Republicans our friends. That was his calculation. This is how big of an idiot this guy is. He just decided to take a bipartisan support and decide to go just with one party.
Netanyahu is not an idiot. He just needed.
This was an idiotic move. That's what I'm saying. This decision.
Short term, Netanyahu is desperate to stay in power, so short term it might have made sense, but it did backfire long term.
It was obvious it was going to backfire long term. There's no way you could do that. And if you're going from full support of everybody to just half, it's an.
I just say based on everything he's achieved, Netanyahu he's a hard man to bet against. But his time might have come. But so far, it's amazing how much he's managed.
We'll see where Israel is in the next 5-6 years, and we'll see how much.
No, but his time has come. He might have come. We'll see.
Okay.
We'll see.
All right, okay, guys, everybody, thank you very much for joining us. This is a great thing. Now, for those of you who do become patrons, you can go and you can have your questions asked first. You ask your questions ahead of time on the Patreon page. It's patreon.com/SJME. You can become a patron for less than $1 a month. Go on there if you like what you see. You can watch all of these streams live, and you can also comment, and you can really participate in this whole thing, and we'd love to do that. And our patron count is increasing. It's going up now, so I think that we're doing something right. So please, absolutely do that. We're gonna have two Q&As.
I think it's the fact that we're letting people ask questions ahead of time. I think
I think that's a great thing. Armin, good job. Monday night we've got Harris Sultan to talk about Pakistan. So. He's coming in Monday night, so make sure you don't miss that one if you're a patron.
Okay. Can I give closing remarks?
Yeah.
Long live Israel. Defend Israel against her enemies, which are Netanyahu, ultra-Orthodox Judaism, and far-right political parties. Long live Israel.
Okay, so that's a clip that you got to put as a promo for this episode. All right, guys, thank you very much. It was wonderful. And Armin, I'd love to hang out after, but I can't.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.
The Secular Jihadists have been made possible thanks to the Illuminati and the covert support of Israel and the CIA. That's what we have been told, but we haven't received our checks yet. If you like what we do, please support us. Share the podcast with your friends. Write and tweet us with topic and guest suggestions. Or head over to secularjihadists.com and give $1 or more for exclusive access to live video. Have your questions read and answered on the air, and more. Till next time, may the flying spaghetti monster be with you.